which means it is time for Schoology Leap.
Pretty exciting.
My name is Mike Indeglio. I work with the PD and ID teams here. This is my colleague,
Sarah Viner. I'm on the professional development team as well, working in a specialist role.
And on the line in the Chatterverse is our boy Dylan Rogers, who's going to be answering some of your questions, flagging some questions for us to discuss at the end. We usually like to save the Q&A towards the end. And as they say in showbiz, the show must go on. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to continue Leap's mission to present you with incredible content. And today we're really excited because we have a new feature to share with you.
Yay!
So I wanted to start the conversation by bringing up something I looked forward to a lot growing up. Did you have the fall TV preview?
We did not.
Okay.
Maybe not an English thing.
Maybe it's an American thing. I'm sure it's an American thing.
Like TV here.
What used to happen is all the big networks used to, on one night, present sort of samplings of all their new shows that were going to be coming out and released in the fall.
Sure.
Well, we here at Schoology wanted to do sort of the same thing, but better. So we, from the beginning of time, it feels like, at least my time here at Schoology, we've gotten feature requests with suggestions for updates or enhancements to our test quiz feature. Might be different question types or maybe some tweaks here and there. And we're always listening, we're always working, and today we are presenting what will be the new test quiz feature. We're calling it Schoology Assessments. And we decided to roll this out to our users, you at large, during the process where we're bringing the assessment feature up to parity with our test and quiz feature. So this will eventually be a replacement, but it's not a replacement just yet. We've decided to let them live side by side in harmony so that nothing in your workflow changes, right? We're just giving you the ability to get into new assessments, get hands-on, start exploring, so that in the future, way out there in the future, you see it, when things reach total parity, we feel that you won't even need test quiz anymore because everything will be set to go in assessments, and that's when we'll make the switch. But just as one more time in big bold print, test quiz is not going anywhere.
So I can keep using test quiz?
You can keep using test quiz. In fact, you probably should.
Okay. When is it going to go away?
No idea.
Great.
Way out in the future.
Brilliant. And when I got to chat with our product team about this, they said, don't worry about it being sunsetted, as we say. It's not going to be going away anytime soon. We still have to have a whole process to convert all of those questions from test quiz into our new assessment. And so until we have that, obviously, we can't take test quiz away. Eventually, when it's completely feature to feature, at that stage, they'll be thinking about getting rid of test quiz because there won't really be any reason to use test quiz anymore because we'll have new assessments, which is a new enhanced version of a test quiz, essentially.
But rather than wait, we thought it'd be nice to let them live side by side so that you can start exploring some of the changes and updates and new question types. Really exciting, the new question types inside of assessments. So, but what we have done is that we've quote-unquote hidden this inside of your system admin tools, inside of system settings, and this will allow you at the system admin level to decide whether it's something you want to push out to your teachers now, wait a little while, or sort of strategize how you want to roll it out.
And so here's a little visual. I don't know about all of you, but we are definitely visual people on our side. So this is actually what it will look like. You have to be a system admin to see this area. So if you're not recognizing what system settings are, you're probably not a system admin, which is fine. This is going to be a decision that's made by your system administrator in Schoology. So when you see on the left-hand side, we have system settings. Within that, the very first option now, as of yesterday, our big rollout date, is enable assessment creation. And what that's going to be able to do is mean in every single course, teachers will now be able to create an assessment. So your add materials menu will actually look added to. You'll see that new option right below test quiz. You see how they're right side by side. They both exist there. New assessment is right underneath that. So once you decide that, yes, this is something I definitely want to give teachers to start playing with and experimenting with and start building their readiness, at that point you can turn it on and they'll be able to have access to adding a new assessment. So this is actually different, just to say right from the outset. This is not the same thing as AMP. So if anyone has heard about AMP, that is a second product that we have, which is awesome. It's a managed assessment. It's a little bit different to what we're doing here. This assessment piece is for all of our enterprise users. It's not like a second subscription or anything like that. So as soon as it's turned on here in your system settings, it's available for all of your teachers, no upgrades or anything like that.
And so this is version 1. It's not a beta. It is working. You can use it in your courses. We're just calling it version 1 because our team is still tweaking and updating, and you're going to see visual changes. You're going to see functionality changes, bringing things up to parity and then surpassing our test quiz feature. So we'll get into some of the specifics of transferring old quizzes and stuff towards the end. Don't want to bog you down. I really want to jump in and let Sarah kind of show you some examples. I'm going to do you all a favor and cut our webcam right now. So here we are. I guess let me ask you, I've heard that tests and quizzes are going to live in harmony with assessments, and I've heard that eventually it will replace it. But if things aren't totally at parity just yet, I guess the question to you is, how? Why? What should I be doing with this?
Totally. Where do I start?
Where do I start once my system admin enables it?
Great question. So this is something we've sort of been tackling with a lot of our teams, especially as we go out to start doing training. For the most part, what we are recommending, and this is we being the PD team, just sort of as a general pedagogical idea, we have seen a lot of awesome new tools in our new assessment that people have been asking for a lot. And with that in mind, there are a few different reasons you might want to start using that sooner than later. So with that in mind, a few things that will probably make you want to start using this, the fact that there are all these brand new technology enhanced questions. So within assessment, you have way more possibilities in terms of the kind of questions that you build out. And so that's one reason that people, I think, are going to be really excited to start just jumping in and starting to build new question types, things that maybe are just smaller formative tests, things that will sort of build up enrichment tests, that kind of thing. Maybe just little items and interactive options for students to play with. So the fact that you can really get deep into the granularity of scoring each question itself, that's really useful. We'll talk a little bit about that in the program. We also have a bunch more accessibility tools to access, things like changing the color scheme and being able to zoom in, changing the font size, being able to have some of these really cool math tools for students as well. So there are a bunch of cool settings that you'll be able to have access to as a student, giving that to your user. So until we have full parity with test quiz, which is not there yet, these are really good tools to just start using and experimenting with to sort of build readiness. It's not going to be exactly the same yet. A few things that you might look for that we don't yet have, one of them super important, is printing. So if you have a lot of students with a 504 accommodation or an IEP accommodation that they have to have a printed test, you do not want to start building out an assessment just yet until we have printing. That's one of the very first things on our roadmap that we are developing. So another thing is the audio and video recording tool. Inside of each of those questions, you're going to be able to record just like you're used to doing in test quiz. This is a really great way to make sure that your students are getting things read aloud to them. Now you can of course use some different native options inside of the devices that your students are using. But until that comes out, if you really need that to be done by the teacher who's building this test, I would say continue to use test quiz. If not, then assessment's a great way to start playing. And another really important thing is the fact that we don't have yet grade by question in assessment. That's going to allow you to get a little bit more information about the item level statistics and analytics. That is also a huge priority that's being worked on. So those are sort of the three main things coming out. And until those are coming out, we of course might want to continue using test quiz just until it's a little bit closer to parity so that you have all those tools available for you. But in the meantime, I think this is a really important thing to start practicing with. So if you give access to all your teachers to have assessment, they can start building out some of these new question types. They can give some of these new assessments as quick, maybe check for understandings, maybe some exit tickets, just really interactive and fun tools to play with. And this can be just a bit less sort of 25 question common assessment situation. It's a little bit more casual than that. And so just definitely encourage people to start playing with this. We wanted everyone to have this in their hands. We wanted people to start using it and then to give us feedback on what they think should be included and what shouldn't be. One other thing I see Teresa was asking, will Respondus work with assessments? It will eventually, but it doesn't right now. So that is on our roadmap as well. I don't have a timeline exactly on Respondus, but I've been told towards the end of the year, the calendar year, Respondus will be available on this. It's just not there just quite yet. And really good question I see from Joseph there that I'm actually going to have to check on if there's a way to enable this from the system settings for one school but not another. That's something I'm going to have to check on, actually. I don't know whether there's building level administration available in that. I believe that that's something we were just pushing out recently. So Joseph, great question. We'll get back to you. So remember, if you do enable it from the system side, it's just going to be in the list. So if teachers don't want to use it, they don't have to use it. You're not forcing them to at all. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these question types. So we talked a little bit about how it's different, how you get to it, where it goes. We're going to jump into the platform itself. So I'm going to go ahead and jump out of this slideshow. No death by slides today. And in this space, I'm just going to show you a few different question types. Now, the first thing I do want to show you is that very initial step I showed you from the Add Materials dropdown. When you choose to add a new assessment, this is the screen you're going to get. So the new assessment has one super key feature right here that's really different. Right from here, you're going to notice that in this namespace and due date, submissions, everything is going to be the same except for this submissions tool is new. This did not used to be here. This used to be in the settings, as you guys probably remember in test quiz. So now you actually have this in the initial frame. And I find that really useful because it was so tricky to try and remember, I'm going to create this assessment, and then on the day when I want my students taking the assessment, I have to remember to go in and enable it. Well, now you can actually set that up right from here. So just notice that that's where that lives now, a little bit different to how it was before. So let's take a look at some of these question types. The first one we'll take a look at is probably lower on that scale. This is just identifying. So this is a multiple choice question. And there are sort of a few different questions that all look a little bit like multiple choice. So from right here in the question setup, you'll notice this looks super similar to how it did before. But in every one of our questions in assessment, you'll be authoring slightly differently. You always start with the question setup at the top half of the screen, and then the second half of the screen will be your correct answer setup. So that's a little bit different to what we're probably used to. We're always going to figure out what we want the student to see to begin with, and then secondarily, what we are hoping that they will answer. So I put in my prompt. Notice I have access to my rich text editor, and for this scenario, I did import a picture. So I just uploaded an image with what we used to know as the Insert Content tool. Here it's just uploading an image, very simple. And I can bring in an image anywhere from my device. That does need to be the correct size. This is a question we had a little bit this morning. Resizing the image needs to happen on your device itself. So make sure that you bring in the image as the correct size. There is one question where you can resize it in Schoology, but the other ones do need to come in as the correct size. So that's something to make sure you're just checking before you bring things in. And then once I've got this all set up, I can go ahead down to my option spaces. And again, you'll notice this is the same thing, the same rich text editor. I can still access all these tools right from here. I can also use those drag handles to drag and drop the answers. And I can add little options at the bottom left of this screen here. So adding more or deleting options this way as well, with the X on the right. Now, distractor rationale is something that isn't really fully functional yet. This is eventually going to give you a little bit more information when you're the grader. So if I'm coming into this test later and I'm grading all of my student answers, I might need a little bit more information about maybe why my student responded C even though the correct answer was A. That's a little bit of more information around any kind of distractor rationale. There's always going to be just more information about the answers that you choose. And that will eventually come up in the actual analytics that we have built in. So not functional right now, you can just go ahead and ignore it for now. And just to clarify, when I say Anne asked what's the correct size for a photo, for a picture, it totally depends on the picture that you bring in. If you want it to be kind of around this size, you're probably looking at about 300 pixels in height. But it totally depends on the picture that you're bringing in. You might need a smaller thumbnail or a bigger thumbnail. So I always tend to go anywhere between 200 and 300 is very easy to see. But if it's a picture that's really specific and there's lots of kind of small details in it, you probably want to go a little bit bigger. So there's no actual correct size. I'm thinking more for your own purposes, correct size. Hopefully that makes sense. So then once I've got that prompt all set up, I can go ahead and look in this correct answer setup space. And from here, I'm going to have the ability to choose the correct answer. Now maybe there's more than one correct answer. In that case, I can click multiple responses and choose more than one correct answer. For this one, I've just chosen answer B. Now, what if there's a second best answer that I also want to give points to? This is what I was talking about when I mentioned granular scoring. That plus sign next to the word correct is going to allow you to put in an alternate scoring. So this is basically my second best answer. Maybe Baroque is the correct answer, but actually Renaissance is almost correct. It's only, one period off. So I go ahead and give them 50%. This makes a lot more sense when it's not just a right or wrong answer, obviously, but this is a great way to set up your questions. And one of the really cool things that you can do, keeping in mind this alternate scoring option, is you can really play with the layouts here. So let's say I make the layout radio buttons, and then I change the number of columns to being 4 columns. Now, this probably looks like all of those many surveys that you've had to take online. So maybe you're actually asking your students for an opinion. This is a quick survey question to begin or end a quiz. This is a really nice way to set that up, because now I can choose each answer as the correct answer. I can assign 100% to all 4 answers, and then there is no wrong answer. So no matter what students write, they're going to get 100% here. So this is just a cool way to you're almost seeing like a Likert scale. It's a cool way to just play with this question type to make it look a little bit different. Now I can also input some author's notes, and those are going to show up for anyone that's grading this test, as well as anyone that is collaborating on creating this test with me. So maybe a few of us are all making a test together. We all teach English, so we sort of divided and conquered over our speaking and listening, literature, and writing questions. And from that perspective, I really need to share some information about these questions with the other people I'm collaborating with. Maybe I'm not the one that's always going to be grading this test. I need to put in some authorial notes about why I wrote the question the way I did, and maybe even some information about how I'm going to be grading the question itself. So underneath that, you also have learning objectives, and these are going to look exactly the same as your learning objectives do everywhere else in Schoology. You can go ahead into any of these different areas, grab a learning objective that makes sense, or more than one, and then attach it to this question. And in that way, you're going to be getting some mastery data. So every time a student answers this question right, they will show that they have mastered that specific learning objective you set to it. Now I can confirm those learning objectives, but if I realize, whoops, I didn't mean to confirm this last learning objective, that's not really what this question is asking them to do. When I click back into those objectives, I can also manage them. So now I can unselect one of them, deselect one. Now, once I think my whole question is looking pretty good, I'm going to go ahead and preview it. In the top right-hand corner, you have a little button that says Preview Question. So when I click on Preview, it's going to show me the question just as though the student will see it. So this is really useful because you'll then have access to being able to actually test your scoring. So remember, the correct answer was Baroque, but if you remember correctly, I actually made all of the answers correct. So check it out. Now when I click in all of these different boxes, now they're all worth 100%. If I had assigned 50% to one of those, I'd see 50 out of 100. And I can also show the correct answers here as well. Now if I realize there's a mistake and I need to go back and change it, I'm going to choose the word Edit Question. Or if I think it looks great, I'm going to choose the word Save in the bottom right-hand corner. Thing we've had a lot of feedback on right here, and something I want to point out, notice there's a little X in the top right-hand corner of your screen. That is not getting out of the preview, that's actually deleting the question. So just make sure you don't click on the X unless you've decided you do not want that learning objective there anymore. Let's go ahead and get out of that. I'm going to cancel it because I already had a correct answer there. So that's just a simple multiple choice question. This is useful, hopefully, to show you how some of the standard questions look a little bit different in test quiz than they do here in assessments. So one really important thing to notice is that we have all of those standard question types on the left-hand side, as well as 2 new fill-in-the-blank questions, a drop-down and a drag-and-drop. And what we're going to do for the rest of this question session is we're going to take a look at the other enhanced question types. So the next one I want to show you is a highlight text question. So the highlight text question is going to come in really handy, especially for English teachers. This is definitely something I think is really useful, but it could actually be really useful in anything that is text heavy. You could even have typed out a formula and you could have students select the part of the formula that has a mistake in it. Or maybe this is some kind of calculation and you're going to ask students where the calculation changed something. So you can get really specific. You'll set up the passage itself. And then in that second tab, you'll set up your possible responses. So this is just asking to find the passage that includes personification. And I chose sentences for this one. So you'll notice every time there's a period, that sentence area is stopped. And I can click on the 2 correct answers here. They'll highlight those 2 answers as the correct ones. And notice, oh, I actually meant to, sorry. Let me make this a sentence. And then in the correct answer setup, all I need to do is set up the 2 correct areas. So we've got well-apparelled April and limping winter treads. So over here I've got 2 different passages highlighted. Those are the 2 correct answers. I've also chosen that there can only be maximum of 2 correct answers selected. So if there are only 2 right things to select for my students, I'll make sure it doesn't let them select more than that. If they get 1 correct but not the other correct, I can still give them points by choosing this partial match option. And if I want to take away extra points, let's say they get a second option wrong, and I want to take away extra points other than just that standard 50%, that's what penalty score is there for. So those are some extra helpful tools to know about within highlight text. And this is pretty similar to multiple choice because here you are also making selections from presented text. But now it's actually in context, so it's much more rigorous because it's in the context of the passage. So this is a great question to play around with. I've put in some author's notes here. I can go ahead and preview that question to make sure I know what it looks like. I can even interact with it. Notice I gave them partial credit, so if I only choose one but not the other, I can still get some points. And when I'm happy with that question, I'll hit save. So the next question type we are going to take a look at is the option to go in and add a label image question. This one's really awesome. So label image over here on the left-hand side, this is going to, I'm actually going to show you one that's already set up. This is going to allow a student essentially to do a matching style question. So at the heart of things, this is also matching. You have the option to pull or drag and drop different options into the correct location on an image. So it is still thinking a bit about placement value here. In this question, it's a little bit more rigorous just because there's the extraction of being on an image itself. But what we would do is go ahead and set up several response boxes. For this one, I have 3 different ones, but this could just be label the bone in the diagram. This could be a diagram of the anatomy, and I've got only 1 label on it for my students to label. Then maybe I have 15 choices to choose from. In this scenario, I've got 3 possible responses and 3 possible spaces for them to be dragged and dropped to. And under the correct answer setup, I can drag and drop them around the page. So I've already set this one up for us, but this is the way it will show up on any image. Notice you have a little button. If you're making this for the first time, you'll have an upload image button. And again, test the size of that picture first. So this, of course, would be a much bigger picture than the one I used before. This is probably about, I'd say about like 700 across pixels, but you'll start to sort of get your eye in as you start experimenting with this. And I brought in that picture as the correct size for my question. So this is the size of the image I wanted, and so I resized it before I uploaded it. Now also underneath that Dropbox, you'll notice I've got additional setup options. And it's always worth checking out what additional setup options are because they are often going to be really helpful little tools that you're looking for. This one is going to allow me to change the size of the box itself, whether I want it to be a little bit bigger or smaller than what it currently is. And if I want it to just adjust to the size of the answer I put in there, I can always choose that word wrap option. Everything else on this page is going to be exactly the same. When I'm happy with that, I can click Save, or I can preview it first, and even sort of play with it as though it's the answer I want. Notice these are in the wrong order, so I only get one of them correct. KE is in the right place, but I need to switch these around if I wanted to get full points. And then it's double checking that calculation for me. If I miskeyed it, I can go ahead and change it. Notice a fun little pop-up there for me. So let's take a look at another style of question. Gail, good question. I'm not sure what the maximum size is. You'll have to play with that because I think it's going to depend on the size of the screen that you're using. If you have a lot of students who are using smaller screens like Chromebooks, that's definitely something you want to test out and play with. It shouldn't get distorted, but depending on the size of the screen, it might be a little bit more difficult to see if it's small screen. The size of the roller coaster taking up the page, I can check that for you. I think it's probably going to be about 700 across though, and it looked like about 250 up and down. But don't quote me on that. I will definitely find a little bit more information about it. The resizing is something that's, I don't know if it's currently being worked on already. It's just something that's not available in here so far. So you'll want to go through that workflow that I mentioned for now anyway. So the next question we're going to take a look at sort of falls under the general bucket of thinking about an ordering style of question. So of course we still have that ordering question, just like we also have matching. And within that ordering question, you're going to be able to do something a little bit different, which is putting this on a number line. So this is really the same functionality in some ways. I'm now asking my students, instead of ordering numbers, for example, I'm actually asking them to order events. So place the following World War II events in the order in which they occurred, from the earliest to the latest. And the title of that number line is going to be years, starting at 1939 and ending at 1944. So that's what will show up on my number line below. Now I can put in as many possible responses as I want here. Something I struggle with a little bit when I'm making this question is that I wish that they could sort of move around and shift so that I could always see all the words in these spaces. And that's a piece of feedback that we've gotten a ton from everyone that's been using assessment so far. So that's definitely something that's on our list of things to alter a little bit. Currently, when you do drag and drop them, you'll notice I can really clearly see some of the words, but it's tough for me to see all of the different words here. So that's something we're thinking about there. But I would create any of those possible responses I want, and then my students would be just dragging and dropping them from right underneath this space, dragging and dropping them onto the correct location in the screen itself. So it was already set up for me here. This is one where I can also give a correct response threshold. So let's say they get it 1 off, they get 1 year wrong, then they can still get points. Now notice if I try and drop this item between 1939 and 1940, it's just going to snap to whichever tick is closer. And that's a setting you'll find under this additional setup options, the ability for these options to snap to the tick. Now that's really useful for my elementary students, especially if I'm working on having students work on those fine motor skills. This makes it a lot easier as well. They also have the option for this tick distance. So let's say I'm doing, instead of a number line like a date line, I'm doing something like order the fractions in the order from smallest to largest fractions. This is a number line, and so because it's intended to be some math option questions, they're actually already just going to shift to being a fraction. So notice if I add another one and I make this, let's say 2/3, and I just write a slash, it will generate as a fraction underneath. So you could always go ahead and make 0 and then 1, the maximum and minimum values, and change the tick distance to being 0.1. That's going to put a bunch of different points on your scale, and then students will be able to reorder those fractions on a scale that actually makes sense. There are a few other tools under these setup options around showing arrows on the scale, showing the first and the last value. If you want to change any of those options, some of the things you're looking for are probably under that setup option space. When I think I'm ready to go ahead and preview that question, I'll just click on Preview in the top right-hand corner, and when it looks good to me, I can save it. So after we've built that number line, we're going to go down over to this chart question next. And one really cool thing to point out about charts, this can be really overlooked, especially I was always an English teacher or a writing teacher, and chart question immediately jumps out to me as, ooh, scary math, haven't had to do that in forever. So with that in mind, I probably wouldn't have played with this myself, but actually, if you take a look at the chart question, under your additional setup options, you don't just have access to one chart, you have 5 different chart options here. So this is sort of like 5 questions in one. And within those options, you can use bar charts, line charts, which will look a little more like this. You can choose a histogram chart, which looks pretty similar to a bar chart, a dot plot, and a line plot chart. And these two, I think, are really fantastic for elementary as well. Things like counting the numbers. This almost becomes like a virtual manipulative. So from here, I can go ahead and set up, I'll choose a histogram here to show you a little more about what that looks like. I'm going to ask my students to interact with this chart. So based on some reading that they did, I need them to chart the information in the question. So this one would be an example of a total bill and how much they left as a tip. How much percentage of that is that of the total bill? So they can drag and drop these different chart columns to being in the correct location. And notice you can also give them some extra options in the bottom of this page to actually allow them to create their own points. So this is really cool. Maybe I only begin with just 1 point, and that's their example, that's their model version. So I chart 1 plot point for them, and then I let them add their own new plot points. That means that they are then going to have access to add data onto this chart. So when I preview this, they'll be able to choose this add data word, and they'll be able to put in extra data and manipulate those chart areas as well. So that's a really fun tool to be able to play with. You can even let them label each of those options as well. Super interactive question, really useful not just for math, but also for things like econ or business or geography. These are all really great tools to be able to translate information from a dense passage into a chart or a visual. And then let's take a look at something a little more subjective. So slowly we're starting to do a little bit more creation, a little bit more synthesis, translations. Now this next question I'm going to show you is a completely subjective question. So we're all the way at the end of that abstract concrete scale. We're way more towards those very deep levels of knowledge, higher levels of thinking around creation and synthesis of information. So for this example, this is a short answer question. So my math short answer question I've set up with some fractions here, built out those fractions, and then what I have access to do in a math short answer question is to give my students access to different keyboards. These are not calculators, they're keyboards. So within the symbols options, notice all the different calculators I can give my students. I've got some geometry, trigonometry, calculus, all these different options for me to be able to have students respond in an open response, but with a really easy way to access all of these symbols and tools. This was a huge game changer for a lot of our math teachers. I know that it was kind of clunky to get some of this information in from elsewhere when you had students trying to do math questions. So this is definitely something I imagine a lot of math teachers are going to start experimenting with sooner than later. So you can give as many keyboards here as you choose and let your students really play with this in an open form. And I want to show you one other example of more of an open form question, and that is this highlight image tool. So this was total creation. Highlight image can also be much more of a creation question. So in this space, I have the option to upload an image. Now maybe I want my students to, by highlighting an image, I want them to circle the broken bone in the X-ray. Or maybe I want them to highlight the fault line on a map, or highlight where the Mason-Dixon line would go on a map of the US, something like that. So with all of those options, I'm actually asking them to upload, to annotate an image essentially. But maybe what I want to do is just give them a space to do an open response. In this question setup, I could upload an image right here that was just graph paper or lined paper. So just taking a quick screenshot, this is going to be any JPEG, PNG, those sort of standard picture questions. It's not going to be a PDF, so this came up this morning, and we tested it, and you cannot upload a PDF to this. So if you already have a PDF that you want students to annotate, we'd recommend just taking a screenshot of that, or you could even just convert that to a different format of a file. So you'll be able to upload that image, and students will be able to choose from all of these colors to highlight or annotate that image itself. And the cool thing about that is, as the teacher, when you're going in to grade this question, you as the teacher are actually going to be able to replay what that student did. So they'll be able to maybe write something down or show some work here. You can click replay and you can see them do that step by step. This is a really cool piece of insight into that live process that students went through. So of course we still have access to a short answer or essay question as we did before. That's going to be really similar. And there are a few other questions that we didn't go all the way through, but every single one of these questions is spelt out in very, very deep detail on our support site. So I highly recommend that you take a look through our support site links for all of the other question types that we didn't have time to go through today. We're also creating some videos around this. This has been Mike and my little brainchild for a while now, and Bradley. And so with that in mind, we've been able to create some different videos that walk you through step-by-step how to create these different question types. About half of them are already up on our YouTube site, so we'll be linking out to those. I know Dylan was posting some links in here earlier with all of those different sites available for you. So definitely click into those and find out all of the support that we have there for you to go through each question step by step. So a couple other things to show from here. I'm going to take a quick look at the setup options. There are some really interesting new settings inside of your assessment setup here that you haven't seen before. Some that you have seen, you still have access to be able to set up your instructions with images, that kind of thing. Underneath that, as usual, you can set a time limit, you can randomize the questions themselves, and you can also hide the points for the questions. I usually go ahead and say no to showing possible points on these questions because it can be a little confusing depending on the percentage of the overall test that each question is worth. So if students are confused by those funky decimal points when you're seeing that in the question itself, just know that hiding those points or saying no, don't show possible points for each question, that might make it a little bit easier. One question that came up earlier is whether you can make each question inside of the test a certain decimal point. So they are going to have to be whole numbers when you are setting up the questions themselves. I'll show you that from back here. The points on the right-hand side, these do have to be whole numbers. And also from this page, you can also just drag and drop those questions into a different order. And you can copy the questions, which is really handy. This is actually a new feature as well that I meant to mention. When you hit copy, that's going to duplicate the question. So maybe you're asking 3 questions that are basically the same, but they're using different numbers and formulas each time. Your copying tool is going to be really helpful to just alter each of those questions. So love that new feature. Sorry, so back on the setup screen, taking a look at this assessment toolbar next, these are some options you can give for students. So I don't know about when you guys take tests what your process is, but if I'm taking a multiple choice test, I like to cross things off as I go. So eliminating answers and then also being able to flag questions to come back later to them, those are both really useful tools. So I can give access to students for both of those. Maybe they can't remember the formula off the top of their head right now. They can always come back to it later. Then I can also give access to students to a calculator, either basic or a scientific calculator. And I can give them an inches or a centimeters based ruler, as well as a protractor to measure things on the screen itself. So those are all really fun tools for students to interact with in the setup itself. Again, when I'm thinking about those quick formative assessments, just little checks for understanding, especially for those quick math tests and math questions, this is a really nice place to come to give them these tools. And then lastly, a couple things that you'll see under student settings here. This is slightly different in that your students can go ahead and view their correct answers the same way they did before. They'll be able to either just not see any of their submissions, see their submissions and which ones were right and wrong, or see which ones were right and wrong with the correct answers. So that gives them a really a good insight into the quiz itself. Really good formative experience there. And then your students will be able to take this test up to 20 times. Notice we don't have an unlimited anymore. And when there was research being done about how each of these features were being used in test quiz, that unlimited wasn't a major use case, so we didn't put that into this space. If you're thinking of 100 ways you needed to use that, please do let us know. And then you also have the option, when your student is taking this test more than one time, to decide how that final grade is determined, either the highest score or the last score. Average isn't here either, so that's one thing to notice we don't have anymore. Again, if you need an average, please do go ahead and let us know. That would be helpful feedback on when you use that. So those are all of our setup tools. One more option that we have here is our student attempts. I don't have any settings in here right away, but just to show you guys, when your students are taking these tests, this is going to look very similar to what you already see in test quiz, with that one key difference that we already mentioned, which was that your students are going to be graded by test rather than by question. So you are going test by test rather than question by question. That is something that is right at the very top of our roadmap to be developed. So this is something that's already in process, and we are definitely wanting to get this out. So that's something you can look forward to seeing sooner than later. I don't have an exact timeline on that, but it's in production. And from here, you'll also be able to unsubmit student tests, as well as go through their submissions and delete their submissions if needs be as well. So that kind of summarizes the whole student experience, the teacher experience of building the test itself. I saw tons of really awesome questions coming through, and I think I answered some of them along the way. There is one or two here that we're going to skip over, I think, and get back to you guys individually when there are questions about things that we don't know. There's one about an API, which is a little bit above my head in terms of tech practice. So Sam, I'm going to get back to you on that one. But to clarify, I saw a question from Ali about where author's notes show up for other people. So that is going to show up in the test itself. And eventually, when we do bring out the analytics, that will show up in your analytics page as well. But right now, this would be for people who are actually grading the test themselves, and they would need to have access to the test. That's a great question, Ali. Thanks for asking that one. Mike, how many awesome questions do we have coming through? It looks like you've got a whole list.
Yeah, so I've curated a list of questions I thought might be helpful ubiquitously across everyone. Well, I've really been trying hard.
That was a tough one. Yeah.
It was. I was trying. It's on my list of words for the day, and I was really trying to shoehorn it in.
Nailed it.
Well, sort of. I just tripped over it 3 times. That said, so I want to start first of all. I know we talked about how test and quiz and new assessments are going to live side by side for a while. Are we working towards a conversion tool? If I built out a bunch of really good and great tests and quizzes we're using across my organization, are those going to go away, or are we going to be able to bring those in?
Great question. Do not worry about them going away. They're not going away anytime soon. So we are absolutely working on that conversion tool, and that is in the process of being made right now. And what will happen eventually, and the keyword there is eventually because this is not imminent right now, is you'll have a conversion tool that will allow you to just literally hit convert my test quiz bank all the way into a new assessment. So that's going to be able to be completely portable. Everything you have in a quiz right now, a test quiz, will be able to be dropped directly into an assessment. So you don't have to worry about test quiz going away until we've created that tool and we've given you a good amount of time to be able to actually pull over all that content. Now, it will, I'm sure, be a little bit of a process. So when I've chatted with our product team that's in charge of this, I've suggested that we give at least an entire summer for everyone to be able to do that. So you don't have to worry about one day waking up and it's not there anymore. This is going to be available for you for a good long period of time. Don't worry about people. I know some people have been getting messages from system admins saying that test quiz is going away. That's not the case. So sorry to sound like redundant, but I think it's really important to just mention it's staying in there. They're staying side by side for a while.
Here's one I'll answer to feel helpful. So we have a question here from Bridget. She's asking, is there a way for system admins to use assessments or to kind of trial it before rolling it out to teachers? Currently, the way this is set up is it's a system setting permission, so that means it's affecting all of your teachers. So once you flag it as enabled, everyone's going to see it in their drop-down. We haven't parsed it as an individual permission just yet. Not sure that that's something we're going to look towards doing anyway. So let's say it's an all-or-nothing process. Just because it's in that drop-down doesn't mean your teachers have to use it. Doesn't mean they have to use it inside of their class. They could just kind of test and play around in there if they wanted to.
Absolutely.
We got a lot of questions in here when you were discussing the different image type questions about the proper sizes.
Yes.
It sounds like right now it's a little bit of a trial and error process.
Exactly. It's totally trial and error. You're always available. There is always the option to go into your source code. I'm hesitant to even mention this. But within your source code, you can, if you're familiar with just seeing what the sizes are of images here, you can always do that. Certainly, while I was teaching before I worked at a technology company, even though it is edtech, still feels techy to us. I definitely would not ever have wanted to go into any HTML version. So for me, what would have been easier is to just go into the images themselves and alter the image size on my desktop or on my Google Drive, wherever I'm grabbing that image. Rather than trying to bring it in and then try and change it in here. It's a little bit more confusing. And I know that question about whether we're creating that resize tool came up. I can't speak to that because I haven't seen it come up on the roadmap, but I definitely would recommend that you put in that feature request to have that happen. I imagine that will certainly show up on our roadmap.
Gina says that this is insanely helpful, so that's great to hear.
Amazing.
Thanks, Gina. Here's a great one. We talked about charts, the chart questions. Are they auto-graded, or is that going to be subjective teacher scored?
Good question. It depends on how you set it up. So if you allow those charts to get students to add their own data, that automatically has to be subjectively graded because you can't set the correct answer until your student adds the data. But if you set it up so that the different levels are specific and there's no added data by students, then that can be automatically graded.
So while we're there, let's leverage it. Let's test you off the top of your head. What'd you say?
I'll jump into it while we're talking about it.
Yeah. Which of our question types are subjective?
Tough question. Oops, sorry. So we have several subjective questions. Those are going to be the ones that are automatically graded, that are not automatically graded. So things like our short answer question, our math short answer question, a chart question if you allow them to add data. There are a few other ones. I'm trying to remember which ones jump in like that. I believe it's going to be our matching question, that if you, I'm really trying to pull from that detail that we came up with a long time ago. There are a couple when you allow students to reorder things in a different way with partial matching, that kind of thing, that will end up being subjective. It should usually throw out a little error message or a little warning for you that it will be subjective though. But off the top of my head, that's a tough one. Those ones I just mentioned, short answer, obviously your highlight image question and your chart question with the added data as well as math short answer, those are definitely all going to be subjective grading. We can make a more comprehensive list of that though too.
I'm seeing a lot of comments that people sort of are lamenting the loss of the average score.
Oh really? Interesting.
So that is definitely something we encourage you to go to support.schoology.com, throw a feature request in, or
Please.
send your recommendation to our team. They are really great at collating all of that information. Here I have the list pretty well curated here if there's anything
Awesome,
you want to jump in. Feedback. Is there a feedback feature available in assessments? When a wrong answer is achieved by a student, can an automatic response pop up for them, sort of like we had in test quiz?
I love that feature in test quiz. I use that all the time, and that's one of the features that is not currently in assessment. So that would be another reason, if you're using that heavily, I would keep using test quiz for that. That is something that people absolutely adore, and the product team has definitely heard how much they adore it. So that is very high on the list to be in development as well.
A quick question going back to the timeline, which was a little bit ago. We discussed that. Does the timeline have a partial credit feature?
That's going to be your correct response threshold. So if you want them to get some partial credit by setting up those units to be a correct response threshold, then you can. If they get 3 of them in the right place but 1 of them in the wrong place, that's automatically not going to give them full points though. So that's sort of the tricky part around that.
I'm not sure if we mentioned this earlier. I wanted to bring this up again, just for those who maybe missed us in the beginning. Right now, if you are a school that uses mobile and you want to start to roll this out a bit, we really highlight right now that you want to use mobile Safari on your devices.
Or any other mobile browser, yeah.
The app itself is in the process of getting this all working flawlessly, but in the interim, we think browser on phone is a better solution.
Absolutely. Browser, anytime you're on a phone or a tablet, anything like that, just go through your browser level to access assessments. It's just not going to show up on the app itself.
And question banks.
Great question. That's a big question. So our question banks are used very heavily with test quiz. We will be creating question banks specifically for assessments. And they'll actually be called something separate. They'll be essentially assessment question banks as opposed to test quiz question banks. So those will be a completely separate product, and we are creating those. Those are also in development. That's sort of the next thing that we're going to be working on after we get our conversion tool from a test quiz to an assessment built. And then eventually you will be able to just convert your test quiz question banks into an assessment question bank. So that's the sort of third step that we'll be working on. All of those 3 things will need to happen before we even think about sunsetting test quiz. So again, just to throw that out there, don't be worried about it going away. Please.
Let's see, a few minutes to go.
There are a lot of good questions in here.
Yeah. A lot of questions about average as well. Can you set up a chart question where the student builds the chart?
Yeah, so if you want it to be completely add data, then you just wouldn't include any data points, essentially. So you'd start out by not having any data points. You can maybe make one as a model, and then the student has to chart it themselves. So that's that add data option under additional setup tools. Your students are going to be able to add new points, and that will allow them to essentially chart something.
We have a question here about Flash. Currently, these do not rely on Flash. The limitations why we're not pushing the app yet is because they're making sure that it's completely comprehensive and working perfectly, which is why we're suggesting, on mobile at least, use a browser. But as far as we understand, it's not a Flash-based tool.
And one thing I saw asked a couple times is our shared passage question. So if you're familiar with using the AMP platform, shared passage is a question that's currently only in AMP. We're still QAing it from our side in assessment, so it's not currently there. But the plan is to put it into the assessment as well.
All right, well, I think we've tackled the majority of big questions here. We appreciate everyone's excitement. We also appreciate everyone sticking with us today as we kind of go through this transitory period with LEAP. We're excited to be working with you. We're really excited about assessments. I'm glad to see so many exclamation points in here. Sarah, any final words before we go get cookies?
Oh yeah, I forgot about them. So I would say, just to get everyone started, some things to just think about if you're thinking, well, this is great, these are all these really key tools, but as you guys awesomely pointed out, there are a lot of things in test quiz that you're probably still really comfortable doing in test quiz that maybe you don't want to start using assessment until they're there. I would say, as much as possible, start just playing with the assessment. We really want people to start using it and giving us feedback so that we can make it better and better and put in some of those key tools that we know you really, really need, especially to start using those with teachers, but also with students. So some things to think about as you're starting to jump into this whole new assessment feature. Things like exit slips, quick ending activities, or quick check for understandings. Being able to give students some different enrichment work where they are doing things like tackling a chart, like highlighting an image and annotating something. There are some key things that have been asked for years for us as feature requests that we really want to be able to do in test quiz that are being answered by the question types in assessment. So we wanted to put that into your hands as soon as possible, and giving you just some places to start with experimenting with this assessment. I think this can be a really key tool for some of those quick activities here and there. So as you're deciding, well, what do I do with this? How do I train my teachers? We're going to be giving you these slides here. We already put those into the handouts for you.
So with that, we are hitting the stroke of 3 o'clock. We thank everyone for their attention. We thank you for logging in with us today, and we look forward to seeing you in a future LEAP.
Thanks so much for joining us, everyone.